This is Sam Black with Drafting Archetypes, and this week we are going to be talking about Maestros in Streets of New Capenna. Maestros has the second highest win rate of the three color decks, far behind Brokers. My general thesis on drafting Maestros is that it's roughly where you want to try to be if white isn't available. I think that you should try to be white, blue-white, green-white, Brokers, something like that. But if white is like heavily cut, it can be good to have other tools at your disposal. And that's Maestros is a good one. As far as like how you get into this, basically I think that you want to default to starting out every draft either taking like a legitimate bomb and going from there, or trying to take the best blue or white cards, and then failing that, take a green card or a black card. And then worst case scenario, take a red card. Or, I mean, worst case scenario is taking like a Jund card or a Cabaret card. But basically, I think that Brokers is where you want to be. I like blue-white a bit more than green-white, but I think green-white's not bad. But you want to try to bias toward like the blue side of white rather than the green side of white, because if you end up shifting too far and need to pivot into an adjacent archetype because like Brokers isn't available, it's much better to have to pivot into Obscura than it is to have to pivot into Cabaret. And then it's much worse to have to pivot all the way into Jund than to pivot into Maestros, Riveteers than Maestros. So if you're starting from trying to be white, it's better to lean blue, try to be blue-white, rather than try to be like open-ended Brokers and maybe like end up getting pulled too far in a green direction. So if you assume that you're starting with blue-white and then going from there, and white's cut, that means that you're going to be blue, and you'll generally pivot toward black, because you have to pair blue with either white or black, basically. You'll draft starting out blue-black, and then you'll add white or red to that. So there will be times when you start with like a Maestros bomb and you're just full Maestros from the beginning. But most of the time, you're going to be like, you started in like a blue space, you got pushed out of white, so you ended up in black, and then you were looking for like, okay, should I stick to blue-black or should I add a third color? And it became clear somehow throughout the draft that you were adding red. And if you look at the stats for the win rates for blue-black with a splash or red-black with a splash, blue-black with a splash performs significantly better. I'm not sure if that's because the blue and black cards are, well, the blue and black cards are better than the red and black cards, but also I think that just like the strategy of like the overall draft philosophy is like more sound if you are drafting to prioritize being blue-black. And so one of the interesting things that we see here is that Snooping Newsy, the blue-black common, has a much higher win rate than Body Dropper, the red-black common. But I don't know that, like, if you ignore the casting costs, Snooping Newsy is really that much stronger of a card. I think that what's going on is that it's just much better to be blue-black than red-black, and that's kind of supported by the fact that Snooping Newsy has like a 1.5% higher like game played win percentage, meaning its win rate just when it's in your deck, regardless of whether you draw it. And so that stat to me largely says how good are the surrounding cards rather than how good is this card, especially for a random 2-drop common. So I think you should expect that when you're Maestros, you're trying to be base blue-black. That also makes it easier for you to like get the ability to splash white so that you can splash any Inspiring Overseers that you see, because playing and drafting Inspiring Overseers rather than not is honestly a key to this format. And so you're generally going to be blue-black splash red is kind of my thesis for how I'm evaluating cards and thinking about proceeding in this deck. So as far as like early on figuring out what's going on, like I said, default, I think you're going to be in blue or white. So I think you're just going to end up with some blue cards most of the time if you're drafting roughly the way that I think you should be drafting. So I don't feel like I need to explain like how do you end up in the blue part. As for how do you end up in the black part, I want to focus on some premium uncommons that put you in black, and those are most importantly, Night Clubber and Corpse Appraiser. It's mostly those. Grizzly Sigil is another noteworthy black uncommon. It wins more than Murder, but it's drafted like a few picks lower. I think that it definitely, I think that there are not very many players whose first impression would be that Grizzly Sigil looks like a stronger card than Murder, but it does win kind of appreciably more than Murder, which surprised me, honestly. Grizzly Sigil is strong, I think, partially because attacking one toughness is a good strategy against brokers. So any of the stuff that attacks one toughness, like Night Clubber, lines up super well against them. And like Grizzly Sigil and Rafine's Silencer to me are kind of like Night Clubber light. And they perform better in this format than they would in most as a result. And Girder Goons is certainly like another black card that can pull you into black a little bit later in the pack if you're trying to figure out where to go. And I mean, Girder Goons and, of course, to a lesser extent, Murder. Certainly, I don't mean to be conveying the message that you should be avoiding Murder or like not prioritizing Murder, though it is worth noting that Murder is taken more highly than Girder Goons, wins appreciably less. I do think that you should just generally be prioritizing Girder Goons over Murder. Snooping Newsy, incidentally, I think also wins more than Murder. I don't think that you should be drafting Snooping Newsies over Murders, though, because I think that you might be tabling those Snooping Newsies stuff. Another card that wins more than Murder, but that I don't think you should be taking over Murder is Make Disappear. It is possible that I'm wrong, and you're just supposed to like take all the Make Disappears. The problem is Make Disappear goes very late, and so it doesn't feel like you need to take everyone that you see. But I do kind of wonder about whether there's a way to like draft where you just take all the Make Disappears and build your deck around the idea that you're going to have a lot of Make Disappears, because Make Disappear has great stats, like the best stats of any Maestros common in Maestros decks. I think that there is more to explore for me in just like what's going on with Make Disappear's win rate and how to prioritize it and how to build around it. Along those lines, Make Disappear, I should be making sure to say what these cards are. Make Disappear is the one in a blue, counter unless they pay 2 with Casualty 1. And it's generally pretty good. I think one of the biggest reasons that Make Disappear is so good is just that it's like the only card in the format that profitably trades with Inspiring Overseer. If your opponent's on the play and they play Inspiring Overseer and you play Make Disappear, you're like up a mana, and it's not easy to like profitably trade with like an impactful 3-mana cantrip. And then aside from that, there are obviously a number of just like powerful, expensive cards. It also helps that there is the cycle of like the 3-color fixer commons that your opponent often tells you that they have. And so you know when they're coming and they're expensive. And so you can just plan your Make Disappears to counter those. And that's a nice, like, safe way to figure out when to slot your Make Disappear into your mana base. Anyway, Make Disappear is good, and you should plan to take advantage of it. Make Disappear is a soft counter, meaning that eventually it like gets weaker because your opponent's more likely to have the mana to pay its tax. And with any soft counter, it's more powerful the shorter your games are, because you want to minimize the portion of the game where you're going to draw it and it's going to be dead. This fact supports another finding that I've had with my own Maestros decks, that I think that they perform a lot better when they air aggressive. I think partially that's just the nature of the format. It's a format where it's generally better to be proactive, but I also think that there are a lot of cards that work well in Maestros that work better when you're aggressive. Among them, I would cite Girder Goons, the 5-mana 4/4 with Blitz that makes a 2/2 when it dies, and Majestic Metamorphosis, the 3-mana blue instance that makes something a 4/4, and Rooftop Nuisance, the casualty card that taps a creature and draws a card. All of those are like good, aggressive tempo play type cards. And I think that you basically want to just like play 1 and 2 drops and use those cards to be able to just like make a lot of good attacks, get your opponent low. And I think that even just like the 2 damage from Glamorous Outlaw can be really helpful at closing games. And I've also been impressed very recently, largely through my experience with Sealed, by Sewer Crocodile, which didn't seem like a very good card, but I think it actually lines up pretty well in the format. And there are a few things going on. One, it generally wants to go index with the 5 different costs theme, and unless you have a lot of Glamorous Outlaws, you're unlikely to have a lot of 6s. So it's nice that it is a 6 in your deck that you can like mill or have die or whatever as a way to turn on your different casting costs more easily. And also, this is a format where boards can often get pretty wide. Inspiring Overseer is a cantrip that leads to big games. There's also stuff like Cabaretti in general, just has a lot of cards that make tokens. And battlefields can get a little cluttered. And in that spot, having something that just like is like unpreventable damage, your opponent can't jump block it or anything, can just seal a game. Also, 4/6 is just really big. There are very few things that can like break through it if you just want to play it as a 6-mana brick wall. And stabilizes well, turns the corner fast. It's impressive for a not very good card. Like, I'm not saying you should prioritize this, just like it's a playable card that you can get for free in a draft that you should particularly keep your eye on if you're like a snooping newsy deck that doesn't have other 6s. So I made a list of like the commons that you want to play and the commons that you are acceptable to play in each of the colors in like a normal Maestros deck. So the only red common you really want to play is Strangle. Partially this is because you're going to be largely, you're going to expect that you have significantly fewer red sources than blue and black sources, which makes a card like Mayhem Patrol a lot less valuable because you are less likely to be able to cast it on turn 2, and it's not as good late. There are Maestros decks that can use Mayhem Patrol, which is the 1/2 blitz creature that has menace and gives something +1 power when it attacks. There are decks that have like a good amount of casualty that can plan to blitz Mayhem Patrol later and sack it, make good use of Mayhem Patrol. But really, you want your Maestros decks to be blue-black with some gold cards and Strangle and maybe some red uncommons like the guy that makes a treasure when it dies. Other acceptable red commons to play: Exhibition Magician, the 3-mana 2/1 that makes a token, either a treasure or a 1/1. Light 'em Up, which I've never played, but it makes sense that it's acceptable along the same lines as Grizzly Sigil. That's the 2-mana sorcery that does 2 damage and has Casualty 2. Casualty 2 is awkward. It's a lot harder to use than Casualty 1, but whatever. Mayhem Patrol, which I just talked about. Wrecking Crew, which is the 5-mana 4/5 reach. I think maybe it also tramples. I think it also tramples. And then Big Score is the red 3, the better Unexpected Windfall, easier to cast. Red 3, discard a card, draw 2 cards, make 2 treasures, instant. And Plasma Jockey, which is the 4-mana 3/1 that makes something unable to block when it attacks and has Blitz. You can play any of that stuff. You don't want to play very much of it. I think Wrecking Crew is toward the better end just because it's expensive enough that you're usually going to have your red mana and it's like a solid body. Reach is pretty important in this format, but it's nothing that you should be prioritizing. It's just like a late card that you can get that's acceptable to play. Black and blue have quite a bit more to offer. The black commons you want are Girdergoons, Murder, Fake Your Own Death. So Girdergoons I've talked about. That's the 4/4 for 5 with Blitz. Likely no. Black 1, instant, destroy a creature. Fake Your Own Death, which is the card that gives a creature +2 attack or +2 power, and when it dies, return to the battlefield tapped and make a treasure. And Corrupt Court Official, which is the 2-mana 1/1 that makes your opponent discard a card, and then arguably Crooked Custodian, which is the 2-mana 3/2 that enters tapped. Fake Your Own Death is interesting. It's another one in kind of the like make disappear space where it has really good stats in terms of win rate, but it's taken very late and it's like hard to know if you should really play a lot. I would be very interested in seeing people who do deeper dives on the stats, how both Fake Your Own Death and Make Disappear play in multiples, because you certainly have the option to play several copies of Fake Your Own Death and Make Disappear if you want, but it's not difficult to imagine a game where you draw two Fake Your Own Deaths, don't have a good opportunity to play it, and lose as a result. But it does have a lot of good interactions in the format. It's particularly sweet with Blitz. I've definitely had some really big blowouts that involved blitzing a Nightclubber and then using Fake Your Own Death on it to like attack for 4 and then like one-sided Pyroclasm your opponent rather than just killing their 1 toughness creatures. Also killing their 2 toughness creatures can be very big. And then Corrupt Court Official, the one that makes them discard a card, is just a great casualty enabler. But it's not just a great casualty enabler, it's also a great Majestic Metamorphosis enabler. And I think that just having like a random body that's not doing much is a good way to disguise your Majestic Metamorphosis. Like if you play a Corrupt Court Official, it's likely not going to have a good attack, and then you pass, your opponent attacks you because you have this like 1/1 that's not doing anything, and then you get to Majestic Metamorphosis and kill their creature. So I think that like just the existence of Majestic Metamorphosis is a great reason to prioritize Corrupt Court Official, in addition to the casualties value that you're going to be able to get out of it. Other black playables: Deal Gone Bad, Dig Up the Body, to a lesser extent, Revel Ruiner, and Extract the Truth. Deal Gone Bad is the 4-mana instant, -3/-3, mill 3. Dig Up the Body is the 3-mana instant, casualty 1, mill 2, return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. Revel Ruiner is the 3/1 Menace Connive, and Extract the Truth is the 2-mana discard spell that can make them second enchantment, sorcery speed. Blue commons that you want: Make Disappear, Run Out of Town, and Echo Inspector. Make Disappear I've talked about at length. Run Out of Town is the like Griptide 4-mana instant, put a non-land permanent, I believe, on top of its or on top or bottom owner's choice of their library. And Echo Inspector is the 2/3 flying connive creature. You can also play Disdainful Stroke, Majestic Metamorphosis, Rooftop Nuisance, and Expendable Lackey, and I recommend all of those. Disdainful Stroke has the best win rate among them, but I like it less than the other 3, and I would draft and play any of the other 3 over Disdainful Stroke most of the time. You can also, in a pinch, play Broker's Veteran or Backstreet Bruiser, but I'm never particularly happy about either one unless I'm low on 2 drops. Or in Broker's Veteran's case, maybe if I have a lot of instant speed casualty so that I can do good tricks with placing the shield counter, like in response to a removal spell or whatever. Making sure that you're going to line up your shield counter correctly and like get the shield counter at the right time on Broker's Veteran makes it quite a bit better. Obviously, you also are interested in the gold commons. Snooping Newsy, way more so than Body Dropper, I think mostly because of the better casting cost. And then Glamorous Outlaws, another fine playable, especially if fixing is relevant. So those are the commons to look for. And let's see, is there anything else we need to talk about? Maybe I already alluded to this, but while you're drafting your blue-black deck, you should continue to, at most points in the draft, take Inspiring Overseer if you see it and try to splash it, even if you're also splashing red. And you should, given that, also, slightly place a slightly higher priority in like the beginning of the draft on Obscura lands and the blue-white land, so that it will be easier to splash any Inspiring Overseers that you see. The format really is the Inspiring Overseer format, and you don't want to miss out on being able to take advantage of that. Inspiring Overseer is also particularly good if you're Maestros, since you're more likely to have like dig up the bodies to get additional value out of it. All right, so quick hits just to recap. I think I've covered the things that I need to say. Draft Maestros when white is not available. Start in blue, pivot down the color wheel into black and then into red. Try to be base blue, black. Try to keep red light, unless red is just a lot more open than blue. Try to be more proactive. It's easy to find yourself trying to be reactive. This is certainly a color combination that can make you think you're trying to play like a value control game, but a lot of the best value stuff works best when you are aggressive, so try to be aggressive. That will maximize your make disappears as well as your tempo cards and blitz cards. And you do want blitz cards to pair with your casualty cards if you can find a window to do that. So I guess just some like nice like gameplay type stuff and like synergies to look for are pairing blitz with casualty so that you can play a blitz creature, attack with it, and then get more value out of it by sacking it to casualty before it would die. Also, fake your own death plays well with blitz especially, but also potentially casualty. And expendable lackey, of course, plays well with casualty, the connive that you have access to, and also sometimes gives you free value off of snooping newsy. Also, I think that the more snooping newsies you have, the more you want to prioritize expendable lackey, both because you might mill it for free and because it costs 1 and it can be hard to find. You're not likely to have a ton of cards in your deck that cost 1, and having a 1 is a great way to turn on your newsy faster. And getting the 5 types for snooping newsy is really big game. There's a huge difference between a 2/2 creature and a 3/3 lifelinking creature, especially in this format where that's like a big part of the range of sizes of creatures. There are not very many big creatures, so in this format, the difference between a 2/2 and a 3/3 is absolutely huge. I think that's basically, if anyone got here late or, I covered a bunch of stuff, I think those are the major important takeaways. So opening this up to Twitch chat for any follow-up questions. If there's anything that you've asked that you don't feel I've addressed, enter it in chat now. While I'm waiting for that to populate, I am now remembering that I was off my game a little bit. Forgot to mention that the notes for this are available at patreon.com/draftingarchetypes. Might be a little late to remind you about that now to follow along, but if you want a review, they're there. Also, if you want to check out patreon.com/draftingarchetypes to potentially support the show, see what kinds of other perks we offer, please check that out. On a related note, I want to thank my newest patrons, Micah, Sam, and Eli. Really appreciate support. Thanks for joining the Patreon. Another content creator mentioned hating Disappear Unlimited, but I have it as a top-rated common. Can I elaborate? Well, so I'm mostly referring to the 17 land stats that have it as the single best performing common in Maestros. As I said, I think that some of its strength comes from lining up well against exactly Inspiring Overseer and some from countering bombs. And I think that there are ways to maximize it, such as having stuff to sack to casualty so that it's alive later in the game, and being proactive enough that you can focus on having a low curve so that you can leave mana up on more turns to be more likely to time it correctly, or to have the mana up when you need to counter something. Again, it's easiest to time if you use the fact that your opponent has showed you what the most expensive card in their hand is by exiling it on a land, and then you can hold the Make Disappear up to counter that card for like a pretty large tempo swing where you were likely able to like play 2 spells and your opponent spent all their mana to play one of the more expensive cards in their deck and you countered it. I can't really speak to why another player may or may not like the card, but the stats for the card are so positive that I think that it's really worth trying to explore and find ways to maximize. And while I would say I've had, good but not mind-blowingly great experiences with it, I'm certainly happy to continue to play it. I don't take it quite as high as its win rate suggests because I do think that it goes late, and I'm hesitant to play too many of them because I think that they're best if your deck is proactive and ending a game quickly, and the more interaction you have, the more slowly you're going to end a game. So it can be kind of like a bit of it doesn't have synergy with itself. Drawing 2 of them, it's just like more likely the game is going to go long enough that the second one's dead or whatever. But it's definitely a nice bit of a spice for a deck. What do I think about the risk of Maestros decks being liable to lose through decking? So that's something that I ran into early in the format, and a great thing to bring up. There are a lot of Maestros cards that mill you, and when you combine Snooping Newsy with Dig Up the Body, you can end up milling a lot. especially if you start using Deal Gone Bad to mill yourself to like set up your graveyard stuff. It is possible to deck yourself. I think that as I better understand Maestros as a proactive strategy, I'm erring toward prioritizing cards like Dig Up the Body a little bit lower and not playing multiples of them, and not building my deck as much around like combining Carmella, the 4-mana uncommon legend that can get a instant or sorcery back from your graveyard when it dies, with Dig Up the Body to generate this kind of like regrow a creature loop. I think that all of the like super late game dirtily stuff is less successful, less where you want to be than the more proactive stuff. So I think that if you're drafting the deck the way that you want to and being a little bit more proactive, you're less likely to run into issues with milling yourself. I think that there are worlds where you're in that other strategy and you have enough like self-mill and enough power that you should go over 40. But I mostly think that like if you're in that spot, you've already done something wrong, such that I don't want to put too much effort into like telling you how to maximize when you're there or what to look for. I would say you're probably better off cutting some of the cards that would make you deck yourself than you are adding cards to facilitate them. Next question. I've really enjoyed Raffine's Silencer in any sack deck, and especially with Fake Your Own Death. Is that a card that can pull you into black? Yeah, I like Raffine's Silencer more than its stats suggests. I've had very good experiences with Raffine's Silencer. I'm really into it. It is definitely a card that can pull me personally into black. I've first picked my fair share of Ravine Silencers. I think that I slightly overrate it, but I don't think that I overrate it a lot. Yeah, it's definitely a good card and a card that I will take as my first black card without a lot of hesitation. More question about blue-black than Maestros. I would consider that germane. Is going for the blue-black draft themes, 5 different mana values in the yard, worthwhile? Yes, sometimes. If you go for it, should you try to play more than 40 to prevent self-mill? Ideally not. So, yeah, I think that rather than thinking about playing more cards, you should just think about diversifying your casting costs. Just like look for Expendable Lackey as a 1. Look for Grizzly Sigil as a 1. If you don't have Expendable Lackey or Grizzly Sigil, consider playing the really bad artifact that searches for a land or does damage to a creature as a 1, just because it's not so bad. And it's not so bad if it's giving you a unique cost in your graveyard and you have multiple cards that care about that. You might just mill it for free with a Lackey or something, or discard it to connive. Or not a Lackey, a Newsy. And then same thing with, consider playing Sewer Crocodile, or, prioritize even more highly than you might normally the 7 mana 5/4, which by the way is another card that can put you into black. The 7 mana 5/4 uncommon that you have to like throw away a resource of some kind to cast, and your opponent has to throw away a resource of some kind so it resolves, whatever that guy's called. Yeah, just look for pay attention to diversifying your casting costs. Just like getting 1 or 2 of a bunch of weird casting costs makes it so much easier. And then Duskmangler, yeah. And then, as far as is it worth going for the theme? I mean, it's basically always worth putting a Snooping Newsy in your deck. And then it's just the more of that kind of stuff you have, the more you should go out of your way to facilitate it. The more self-mill you should think about playing, the more you should prioritize different casting costs. Most of the cards that care about it are pretty good. And so, it's just a function of how many of them it's not like you take them all whenever you see them, but just how many you end up with. You usually want to play most of them, and then it's just the more you have, the more you try to make them succeed at their ceiling. Aside from Inspiring Overseer, are there any other white commons or uncommons I'd be looking to splash in Maestros? Let's see. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking they're more likely to going to be blue-white commons or 3-color commons than mono-white commons. The next best white common is Raffine's Silencer, which is not a good card to splash. Uncommons, I mean, if you're already splashing an Overseer, you maybe splash the deal 4, gain 2 or something if you have good mana to support it. I think it's pretty reasonable if you're splashing an Overseer to use the 7 mana Angel common mana fixer thing to splash it, since it's going to help you with your splash. And I kind of like having the big creature that gains life to turn the corner, and as a good I've milled it and now I play a Dig Up the Body and I get it back kind of card to add some strength to your deck. So I would say that would be one of the main ones I'd be looking for. Is a mix of Majestic Metamorphosis and Rooftop Nuisance good, or are there reasons to focus on one or the other? Interesting question. I'm generally pretty happy to have both of them. Like, if you already have like X of one, should you switch to have the other, or should you just have more of the one you have? I think it's probably better to have a mix because I think that they're kind of similar power level. I think overall, Majestic Metamorphosis is a little bit better than Rooftop Nuisance. I'm not sure like when I would take Nuisance over Metamorphosis. Maybe if I have just like a lot of like 1/1s or something. Like if I have like a lot of Corrupt Court Officials, but like Corrupt Court Officials is good with both of them. But like I guess if I have like a lot of like spot removal and Corrupt Court Officials, so that I'm trying to play like a grindier game, and Rooftop Nuisance is functioning well as like a card advantage card, then I could see it. But like Majestic Metamorphosis just does all the same stuff so well. I don't know. Yeah, I think like Majestic Metamorphosis over Rooftop Nuisance most of the time. Maybe if you're like super creature light and you're just worried about like you like that you can cycle the Nuisance without a creature, but you can cycle Metamorphosis on your opponent's creature if you have to. But Guidance gives you a little more value when you do so. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have like a great conclusion on that one, but I think it's an interesting question. The biggest trap Maestros card? I'm not sure. Like someone suggests Carmella, but Carmella doesn't have bad stats and it does some pretty strong things. I wouldn't personally consider Carmella a trap. I would consider it a card that you could draft too highly and it could lead you into like more of a controlling space than you should want to be. But I don't think it's like a bad card itself. Maestros Ascendancy is a trap. I think that there are many decks where Maestros Ascendancy is bad, probably more than there are where it's good. I'm not sure about like, good it is at trapping people. I guess it's like there are a lot of slow rares that are probably traps. I'm not going to like try to list them. I don't think that, I don't know. Maybe I should, but I'm not going to. I think honestly the biggest trap Maestros card might be Body Dropper, because it plays well with both Casualty and Blitz. And so it's not that hard to have a Maestros deck where Body Dropper looks like it's going to do really strong stuff, but then it's going to mess up your mana because you don't want very many other red cards. So I think the answer is that Body Dropper is the biggest Maestros trap card. How do you shift evaluations if you are more of a like body dropper deck with blue splashes? I did focus exclusively on blue splashing red, which is probably a disservice. I do think that it's possible for like, red to be a lot more open than blue and to be base red. That's worth talking about a bit. I think that there is a base red deck that uses Body Dropper, Mayhem Patrol, and Plasma Jockey well. And then you can potentially play like Light 'em Up because it's good with your Blitz stuff. And your blue cards in that deck are going to be like the blue tempo cards, like Rooftop Nuisance and Majestic Metamorphosis and Run Out of Town are all going to be really good there. The blue creatures aren't going to be very exciting, but the blue creatures aren't very exciting to begin with. So I do think that the like red black aggro with good Casualty and Blitz synergies with Body Droppers that splashes blue tempo cards, I think that is a respectable deck. I don't mean to say that you shouldn't draft that. I think that most of the time your like meta approach to the draft should start you in blue, and then it should be harder for you to end up in that just because of like the bias toward attempting to be in blue white that like keeps you out of red black early. And if you're just like getting hard cut on blue white, get strong red and black early. I do like believe in like red black aggro's potential, and I do think that like splashing those blue tempo cards can help the deck if your mana supports it. I think there's something there. I don't think you should ignore it. I don't think that like the red black version of Maestros is like a failure or anything, and it's not something you need to like go super far out of your way to avoid. It's more that I think that your natural path should lead to being base blue black. But in hindsight, I think that I probably should have done a little bit more earlier in the podcast to highlight the differences and the fact that like red black is a way that you can go with it. So really appreciate the question there. Has Graveyard Shift been good for me? Is Graveyard Shift the 5-mana reanimation spell that works if that like is an instant if you have like different types. The answer, if it is that I haven't personally played with it. Yeah, it is. I haven't personally played with it. It clearly has a pretty good ceiling. I think that, turning on its instant speed is really big. And if you have like a bunch of self-mill and you're playing like sewer crocodiles and stuff that you can mill, or, even more like Dusk Mangler, definitely seems like a card with some potential. But as to whether it's been good for me, I just haven't been in a spot to try it yet. Next question. Are control decks bad to be playing in limited overall? No, not at all. It's just that this format is generally not great for them. That it's definitely format to format, and there are just a lot of mechanics in this format that reward being aggressive, and a lot of them exist in this color cluster, such that I think here in particular, but also in this whole format in particular, you want to generally err toward being more aggressive. To what degree does your metagame bias change depending on your draft environment? That is, on Arena, there's no ranking put into the draft pods, so you may have fewer people taking the best cards overall versus an Arena Open Day 2, where everyone's already trying to be blue-white. Obviously, different in different like local store type metagames, or if you have like a skilled group of friends and you're drafting with them. The answer is that I don't have enough experience these days, or certainly in this format at all, switching between those different environments to like get much of a feel of how they feel different. Certainly, if you feel like you're drafting with people who really don't know the set, it's more likely that you want to position yourself to take advantage of the best cards. You should just default to blue-white. Whereas if everyone's defaulting blue-white, it might be correct for you to start by trying to default to blue-white, but like obviously the threshold to be like, oh, I see that this isn't happening and pivot off of it should be much lower. Because like, if you're in an environment where you don't expect people to be like forcing blue-white, then, if you don't see a blue or white card in a pack, that might be a fluke. But if you expect everyone to be forcing it, you don't see a blue or white card in a pack, it's more likely that that's a signal. So I think your overall approach shouldn't be that different, but you should be like quicker to pivot to a lane that you expect to be open, the more you expect people to like all have the same preferences. And that might be because of skill, or it might be because of anything else. I feel like most of my Maestros decks have been much more control than tempo/aggressive. If you're getting into them with cards like Hostile Takeover or Corpse Explosion or other long game inevitability builds, are there other cards that you value more than you might otherwise? So I kind of think that like with Hostile Takeover, I don't think that I would try to draft significantly more as a control deck. I think that like Hostile Takeover just like works really well when you're beating down. You kind of naturally end up having some bigger creatures in Maestros if you want them, and like you save a creature that hits for 4, you clear out all their other stuff. Like it's actually good if you've gotten them low and then use Hostile Takeover as a finisher. Corpse Explosion, kind of similar situation where it's like, scalable kill X, and it's a lot better if it's like Plague Wind that lets you kill them than if it's just like Wrath that keeps you alive. So I think the answer is, even when you have those cards, I still think you should try to be aggressive. And given that, I don't think you should be like looking for which cards are going to like change your evaluations overall to support them. You should just be trying to do largely the same thing. That's my answer there. The only thing I would look for is to play like bigger creatures more. I'm going to wrap this up here. Thank you very much for tuning in, everyone. And I believe that for next week, I will be starting up the Patreon polls again to determine what I'll be talking about. Stay tuned to the Patreon to vote in that, to let me know what I'll be talking about, and we'll get into whatever it is next week. Have a great week, and bye for now.